Welcome to Talking Science Africa, a show where we bring you science and researchers who are doing amazing work in the science world. We ask them to explain it us in a layman language so that we can also get to know what they are doing. And today on the show, we host Dr. Joshua Rukundo. He is the Executive Director of Chimpanzee Trust, an organization that oversees Ngamba Island, which is situated on Lake Victoria, and which is a place where you can find chimpanzees. The closest place where you can find chimpanzees near Kampala. The reason why we are hosting him today is that he was co-author of a recent study published in Science, which examined the rationality of chimpanzees. We always know that chimpanzees are very smart, but to what extent are they smart? How rational are they? How close is their rationality to our rationality as human beings? Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for the amazing work that you are doing.
It's our pleasure to do it, yeah.
So most of the times when I'm interviewing people, the first question that I tend to ask them is, how did you end up doing this kind of work? So you are a veterinary doctor.
Yes.
Veterinary doctor have too much work to do. We have hundreds and hundreds of animals to look after. So how did you end up dedicating your work to chimpanzees?
Chimpanzees particularly. Yeah. Okay, I'll start as why I became interested in veterinary work. Growing up in Kampala, we used to go to the village every holiday, and one thing that I used to find fascinating was my grandmother. My grandmother was the village herbalist, but she used to also treat animals, particularly the goats, the poultry, and even the cattle. And she used to just simply mix herbs, and I used to find it very, very fascinating the way she used to restrain the animals and administer the concoctions she used to make, and people used to call her, and she had this additional passion and love for animals. So that is what attracted me first to, literally animals particularly, but also their health and management. And she used to explain to me the different types of ticks that would be on them, and how the concoction would help to remove the ticks, the things should make them drink, what kind of treatment she was giving and why she was giving it, and all that, etc. So that gravitated me towards medicine, so to speak. But with time, as you know, I went about my work, I got fascinated by wildlife in general. So that led me to pursue veterinary medicine at university. And while there, I of course gravitated to wildlife because that was my particular interest. And while I was training, I used to, whatever time I would get when I would be on holiday, I would always volunteer at the zoo here in Entebbe. And while volunteering there, under the mentorships of doctors like Afema, who were there at that time, Dr. Sifat Ludwig, I got fascinated by primates themselves, because I went to see she would be administering, that is Dr. Afema, administering drugs that we use, injections that we use as humans. And I was wondering, how is it that these primates use the same kind of drugs? And initially I had a huge fear for chimpanzees, because even then they were considered very dangerous. They were, access to them was restricted. You had to be having a certain level of training before you would be allowed to work in the chimp house and the zoo. But simply observing them on the chimp island, which was already there at the zoo, you went to see that they had a certain level of intelligence. And actually, honestly, I didn't really think I would ever have the opportunity. For me, my dream was to work at the zoo. And I applied several times, but unfortunately, so I didn't get a job there. So I went back to doing wildlife and domestic animals until the opportunity to come to Ngamba Island presented itself. A colleague of mine whom I studied with knew about my passion, and he had gotten employment there. Then he had also a lot more passion for gorillas, generally primates. So when he got another opportunity to work with the gorilla doctors, he even recommended to management and let me know, and I applied, and fortunately I got the job. And since then, I've literally been hooked to the chimpanzees. They're working with them generally, it never gets boring and it's always exciting, and we continue to discover new things about them every single year. And that is why we do some of these experiments and tests that we do with them.
Yes, thank you. So there are so many people, I think like 98% of Uganda's population has never seen chimpanzees.
Yes.
So for such kind of an audience, and for you who deal with chimpanzees nearly on a daily basis, or you are always with them, and for many years, how would you describe the personality of chimpanzees?
Well, we, as scientists, we already know that as primates, they are very close to us. They are part of the 5 primates, of which we are also part. And genetically, we are very similar. And that means we share a lot in terms of physiology, in terms of the biology itself that we have as humans, together with chimps, gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, other primates. But we're talking about the great apes specifically. And that similarity has been exploited over time because it's not us to discover that first. Animals generally have been exploited for the benefit of man for hundreds and hundreds of years, I think as much as man existed. We've tamed animals for domestic use, for labor, for food, and we've continued from the past and now to continue to use animals to test drugs. Early man used to observe what animals would eat to know that this is now edible, and then they would go ahead and consume it. So also, when medicines were first, I'll use the term loosely, were being first used in early times, it was not literally known as medicine, maybe for eating certain herbs or eating certain vegetables or eating certain leaves to treat certain conditions, maybe stomachache or whatever. We believe that it initially came from observing animals, and many of the animals that were very closely observed were those that were similar to us physically, and that was primates, and particularly great apes. So logically, as humans developed over time, they started testing the drugs and chemicals and the response to them. All early scientists would always test drugs on lab rats, on rabbits, on whatever, and eventually on primates, because certain times the reactions are different depending on the species, but the closest resemblance or the closest physiology would be the apes, and particularly the chimpanzees. The chimpanzees were easier to get a hold of, easier to manage when they were still young and babies, and easier to observe over time. So most of the vaccines that whose benefit we enjoy today, vaccines like hepatitis, etc., were initially tested and tried out in chimpanzees. And we also know chimpanzees, because of their physiology, were first sent to the moon as the first literally ape that was there, because the response to space would mirror what would happen in humans. So that is how over time we've exploited animals, and particularly the chimpanzee, and that is why with time it became a problem, because they were being actively hunted in Africa to be used in biochemical laboratories in the developed world from way back from the 30s, 40s and 50s to date, for testing cosmetics, for testing vaccines, for testing response to certain drugs and chemical reactions across the board, And the closest they could get to mimicking what would happen in a human being would be the chimpanzee. And their population ended up decreasing over time because of their own behavior. Because chimps don't replicate as much as rabbits, they don't replicate as fast as pigs, they don't replicate as fast as fowls that are used, or rats. So their population got decimated, especially in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Because a chimp will probably have 2 or 3 babies, if it's lucky, most likely 2 in its lifetime. They care for their babies mostly throughout their life. So the replacement was not enough, and that is why we have the crisis right now, and they are listed as endangered species because their population numbers have really gone low. Yeah.
Okay, that's important, and that I had actually not thought about us. So connected to that, what's the history of Ngamba Island? How did we come to have it?
Yes, Ngamba Island is a chimpanzee sanctuary located on the island, Ngamba Island, which is in Lake Victoria, and it is the one and only sanctuary for chimpanzees in Uganda here. It started as a joint collaboration between a number of conservation agencies to address a problem of chimpanzee trade, pet trade at that time, illegal pet trade and bushmeat, but mostly the pet trade, which I've just alluded to, because these chimpanzees were being exploited, by big pharma for experiments. So the source was in Africa, and Uganda during that time in the 50s, 60s was, a good place to do that kind of business because of the insecurity and instability that we had. So the Jane Goodall Institute, together with other local institutions like Department of Wildlife at that time and other international conservation agencies, got together to try and provide a solution to the illegal pet trade that was happening. In its initial beginning, as stability came in, then enforcement was happening. In the early 80s, animals were now getting confiscated at airports, at border control agencies, as they were being smuggled abroad for all these different purposes, either for the pet trade or the bushmeat, or most especially for sale onto laboratories and other places where they experiment them. So as they rescued them, they had nowhere to put them. So that is when the idea of the sanctuary was set up, because at that time the problem was quite huge in Africa. The sanctuary was set up as a place where the rescued and orphaned chimpanzees could now find a home after all the trauma they had gone through. So in 1992, I believe, the sanctuary was opened. But of course, there was initially where they were being kept at the zoo. That time it was still called the zoo, until it didn't have enough capacity to hold all the rescued animals, and the sanctuary was set up. It started as a project under JGI and became an independent entity, I think, in 2005. And that's when the trust itself was registered to manage the sanctuary.
Let's turn to your study now.
Yes.
This study, published in Science Journal, tested the rationality of chimpanzees. And rationality is a trait that has always been thought to be something that is reserved for human beings.
Yes.
Completely human beings, not the primates that are close human beings. So, first, what inspired this study?
Well, most of the studies in chimpanzees have been inspired by historical studies. If we were to roll back the years a little bit, a young lady, Dr. Jane Goodall, at that time she was a young lady, was dispatched by a world-famous anthropologist, Dr. Leakey, to come to Tanzania to study chimpanzees, to observe their behavior and learn a little bit about them, because they were being used in experiments at that time. Like I said already, one had been sent to the moon, and chimpanzees were known in the developed world, and they were known to be intelligent. So she came to observe them in their natural habitat, and she observed them for several years. So when she made a publication and she demonstrated through her observations and her very carefully written notes of how she was seeing that chimpanzees were using tools to get rewards, and specifically they were using tools like a rock to break nuts, using twigs to fish ants out of ant hills, levers to move heavy objects. They would use a stick or something as a lever. The tool use itself at that time was a reserve for humans. It was only humans that were known to use a tool. Actually, the word tool was defined as something that is used to make work easier by human beings. So I remember the famous quote that Dr. Leakey said after she made one of her presentations, that probably we need now to redefine the word tool. Because some of these things as humans, some of the use of tools and use of thought, the ability to have a soul, the ability to have compassion, was typically reserved for humans until we continue studying animals and we say, really, can't they also have this as well? And the more we study the chimpanzees, we come up with these questions. We're like, how do they make decisions, for example, to become close to another chimpanzee, to work with another chimpanzee to solve a problem. Because initially our studies were to see how they cooperate with each other. They were cognitive studies too. Do they understand a problem? Can they solve it? If they can understand a problem and solve it, if the solution requires help from another individual, would they seek that help? What decisions would they make to decide who of the other individuals they could select to work together, to cooperate? And those were initial studies. By the time I was joining, those are studies that were being done on chimpanzees and how they would cooperate to solve problems. And of course, we designed it in such a way that as soon as they solve a problem, they get a reward. Now we thought that can they take it a step further? Because these cognitive studies, we compare with humans, the way we also go through the thought process and the way we make decisions. And we already know that that chimpanzees, their brains and development and the way of thought is equal to, a human being up to a certain age. Then there our brains develop much faster, and that's what gives us the superior intelligence, so to speak. So our study was saying that if they're given certain clues, they are given certain clues, would they use those clues to infer, to make a decision to get a reward? For example, we know that there's this famous game that we do with children, peekaboo. Peekaboo. Children and infants, let's specifically say infants, learn through that game to understand that if something cannot be seen doesn't mean that it's not there. When you cover an object, initially as a baby they would assume it's not there. But once you uncover it, reveal it, uncover it again and reveal it, their brain makes those synergic connections through their neurons and everything. We'll not get into that. And they make the connection that they can use the cue that either they have seen it before, or maybe when they touch and feel a lump under, there is something under it. So we wanted to see, is that similar with chimpanzees? If we give them certain clues, will they use those clues to determine that there's a reward or something? And the way we designed our tests, particular time, we were seeing, we'd give them cues. We use rewards. We use words like pieces of bananas, pieces of apple, pieces of food, basically. That's what motivates them. And we say, okay, if I show you several containers, and on each container I put a picture of a fruit, would they now be able to make that connection that where I see a picture of a stone, there is a stone, or where I see no picture, there is nothing, and where there is a picture of a banana, there is a banana inside that? And they snapped that up very quickly. They learned very quickly. Then we took it a step further. We're like, what if there is no visual cue? What if it is sensory, maybe to hear or to see again? And would simply put something in the container and we shake both of them. One is empty, one has something. And we, of course, in scientific experiment, you do controls, you keep changing the variables to make sure that there's consistency with their decision making. But they would also be able to make those decisions with time, not immediately, but they would with time learn and know, okay, this particular sound they're hearing is actually a coin. This particular sound sounds like it could be a fruit. This particular sound sounds like maybe a rock where it is not a reward. And that is how we came up with the way they rationalize in making some of these simple decisions. Those were more simple experiments. Then we went to took it even a step further. If we trained one chimpanzee and it learned, would another learn the same by simple observation or from its colleague? And then we would bring in another chimp maybe to watch from another room and see if they can infer without going through the experiment themselves. And when they come to the experiment, they immediately make the correct decisions simply by observing. So those are simple experiments, but they help us to understand the way their brains work and also to help us understand that they can make rational decisions. If, say, in the wild, they know with time that if like on Ngamba Island, we have an electric fence. Let me use a real life example. We have an electric fence that separates us. And if you touch it, you get shocked. How do the chimps know not to touch it? It is through try and error, probably. But some of them have never touched the fence. And that is because they have simply observed the others, or they have been taught by the others not to. They may not actually rationally think about why is it. Yeah, there have been experiments that I've done with monkeys where you hang a banana and then if they touch the banana, they get punished. And then they bring in another monkey, and if the other monkey touches the banana, both of them get punished. And with time, other monkeys that are brought in and don't know the reason will prevent the others from touching the banana just simply by inference. So we know that now they can make decisions not knowing why. But that is also similar to humans. So that the rationality has two sides of the coin. Sometimes we make irrational decisions, or we just simply follow what we've been taught without rationalizing as to why it happens. So we also run those similar instances. But we know that in the wild they can make decisions on whether to be able to confront another chimpanzee group if they decide, whether they can read the situation and say, are we in danger or not, and then make a conscious decision either to confront or to evade. So those are the kinds of experiments we run, and we've seen that chimpanzees actually make rational decisions a little bit better compared to other animals.